When you stop chasing, something shifts, and it terrifies them. Not because you yelled, not because you made a scene, but because you disappeared, because you became quiet, because your energy, once freely given, suddenly vanished. You see, people grow comfortable with your hunger. As long as you're chasing, apologizing, explaining, proving, they feel powerful. They feel needed. They feel in control. They get used to the rhythm of your pursuit. It feeds their ego. It reinforces their illusion that they are irreplaceable. And when that suddenly ends, when the texts go unanswered, the apologies stop, the justifications dry up, they panic. They stare into a silence they don't know how to interpret, and that silence becomes a mirror. A mirror that doesn't flatter. A mirror that doesn't explain. A mirror that reflects their true position in your life. Because now they're looking into the silence, and the silence is judgment. Before we go deeper, write in the comments where you're watching this from. Let's see who is actually waking up, because this message isn't for the naive. It's for those who are done performing, done justifying, done begging to be chosen. Nietzsche understood this dynamic well. He wrote about the will to power, not as a desire to dominate others, but as a deep internal drive to assert yourself as a force in the world. A force that doesn't need permission to exist, a force that doesn't beg to be seen. When you stop chasing people, you stop outsourcing your worth. You stop treating other people as judges of your value. You reclaim the will to power. And that is when you become dangerous. Because suddenly, you're not begging to be chosen, you're choosing. You're not asking to be seen, you're seeing clearly. You're not knocking on doors, you're building walls. And this, for people who fed on your compliance, your availability, your desire to be understood, is terrifying. Because their power was never real. It was borrowed. It existed only in your willingness to keep showing up. And when you stop, when you disappear, that illusion crumbles. They fear the version of you that doesn't ask for anything. They fear the version of you that doesn't explain anymore. They fear the version of you that has turned the mirror back on them and walked away. And make no mistake, they will react. They will reach out. They will provoke. They will twist the story. Not because they care, but because control is slipping. Because without your pursuit, their sense of superiority collapses. They fear your detachment because it's not coldness, it's clarity. Clarity that exposes the entire dynamic for what it was. So the next time you're tempted to break your silence, to chase, to explain, to prove your side of the story, remember this. The moment you stopped needing them is the moment they started needing you. That's not cruelty. That's balance being restored. You just became someone they can't manipulate, someone they can't guilt into compliance. And that, to those who fed off your weakness, is the scariest thing of all. They never expect you to detach. They expect anger, tears, confrontation, a reaction they can measure and manipulate. But detachment? That's a language they don't speak. It's silence instead of shouting, stillness instead of chaos, indifference instead of obsession. And to someone who fed off your emotional responses, your detachment is not peace, it's war. Most people think detachment means not feeling anything. That's wrong. Detachment is feeling everything, observing everything, but choosing not to be controlled by any of it. It's not numbness, it's mastery. And that's what Nietzsche pointed to when he spoke of self-overcoming. The highest form of strength isn't found in dominating others. It's in refusing to be dominated by your own impulses, attachments, and emotional addictions. The truth is, most people are addicted to drama. They confuse attention with love, conflict with passion, emotional chaos with meaning. So when you step out of that cycle, when you no longer engage in the push and pull, they accuse you of being cold, heartless, arrogant. But what they're really saying is, I can't control you anymore. Detachment terrifies people who relied on your reactions to validate their power. Your silence exposes the performance. Your lack of engagement ruins the script. Suddenly, they have nothing to push against, no strings to pull, no wounds left to poke. That's when you become free. Because detachment isn't walking away from life. It's walking away from being emotionally enslaved. It's the realization that not everything deserves your energy, not every fight is yours to pick, and not everyone deserves a seat at your table. You begin to live on your own terms, not in rebellion, but in sovereignty. And in that sovereignty, you don't need to raise your voice. Your absence will speak louder than your presence ever did. That's the paradox. Once you detach, you become the center of gravity. The person who once begged for attention is now the one they orbit around, trying to understand why they lost access and how they can get it back. But the door they used to walk through, it no longer exists. Because the old version of you, the one they could reach, provoke, and control, is gone. This isn't revenge. It's evolution. Detachment isn't weakness. It isn't indifference. It's power. Quiet, unsettling, undeniable power. When Nietzsche wrote about overcoming, he wasn't talking about conquering others. He was talking about mastering the self. Emotional detachment is one of the highest forms of self-mastery. Not because you feel nothing, but because you consciously decide what is worth your energy and what isn't. You become deliberate in your focus, selective with your responses, and immune to the manipulations that once derailed you. In a world that thrives on outrage, reward systems for impulsive reaction, and applause for performative suffering, detachment is rebellion. It is radical resistance. It's the ability to say, I do not owe you my reaction. It says, I will not be baited. I will not perform. I will not exhaust myself trying to make people understand who are committed to misunderstanding me. And that makes people uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable. Because most are addicted to response. They poke, they provoke, they test. Because they need a reaction to feel validated. They expect you to flinch. They expect you to justify yourself. They expect you to crumble under scrutiny and conform. But when you don't react, when you stay grounded, centered, and quiet, something powerful unfolds. You create a vacuum where their chaos cannot breathe. They are left to deal with their own noise, their own projections, their own games. Their tactics fall flat. And that silence, that refusal to play along, it reveals their weakness. Because now they're shouting into emptiness. And a person screaming into a void doesn't look powerful. They look exposed, ridiculous, transparent. That's when you start to realize something fundamental. Your energy, your attention, your emotions, they are currency. And not everyone deserves to spend it. Not everyone has earned the right to access it. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel deeply. But you know better than to bleed for people who feed off your open wounds. It means you care more about your own peace than about managing their chaos. More about your clarity than preserving their comfort. More about your truth than their approval. This shift, this transformation, does not come easily. At first, it feels foreign. You'll question your silence. You'll wonder if your boundaries are too harsh. You'll feel guilty for refusing to explain yourself. But every time you hold your ground, every time you resist the urge to explain, chase, or fix, it becomes easier. The muscle strengthens. The pattern breaks. You begin to hear the noise for what it is. Desperation, not dominance. Insecurity, not insight. You start to see how much energy you've wasted trying to calm storms that were never yours to carry. Eventually, the bait stops working. The noise fades into background static. And the chaos can no longer rent space inside you. You no longer flinch when someone tries to provoke you. You no longer lose sleep over what someone said. You no longer mistake drama for connection or attention for love. You've detached, not from the world, but from the hooks it used to control you. That's when you become unshakable. Not because you've stopped feeling, but because you've stopped being controlled. You feel everything, but you choose how to respond. You carry your power quietly, with intention. And in a world desperate for chaos, desperate for reaction, desperate to own your mind, this level of inner calm is rare. It's unsettling, it's feared, and above all, it is free. People spend their lives playing roles, chasing validation, performing for approval. They attach their identity to how others perceive them, and in doing so, hand over their power. But when you detach, not just emotionally, but psychologically, you disrupt that entire system. You become what Nietzsche called a game breaker. Detachment strips the stage, it removes the script. When someone insults you and you don't flinch, when they try to guilt you and you remain calm, when they withhold affection to control you and you don't chase, it unnerves them. You've stopped reacting the way they've been conditioned to expect. That's power. That's psychological warfare without lifting a finger. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most relationships, most interactions are not about connection. They're about control. A tug of war of egos. People test your boundaries not because they misunderstand them, but because they hope you'll abandon them. They want to see if you'll trade your dignity for their comfort. But the one who is detached, the one who has nothing to prove, cannot be lured into that trap. Nietzsche believed strength wasn't in domination over others, but in mastery over the self. And the person who no longer needs to react, explain, or defend themselves has already won. Because once you stop playing the game, you take away everyone else's power to keep you on the board. But this kind of detachment requires brutal honesty. You have to confront your own need for approval. You have to stop lying to yourself about your reasons for staying, for engaging, for returning to the same emotional battlegrounds. You have to admit where your ego is still running the show. And once you do that, once you strip away the illusion that you need anything outside of yourself to feel whole, you start to access something most people never will: inner stillness. And from that stillness, a new kind of strength is born. Not loud, not dramatic, but immovable. You don't fight the old game. You outgrow it. You walk off the stage and you burn the script on your way out. The ability to walk away, calmly, quietly, without fanfare, is one of the purest expressions of emotional detachment and inner strength. It's not about giving up. It's about understanding that your presence is a privilege, not a punishment. Nietzsche understood that the will to power was not always a loud, dominating force. Sometimes, it was the quiet assertion that you do not need to be where you are not respected, that your energy does not belong in places that drain you. In a culture obsessed with proving points and winning arguments, walking away is often misread as weakness. But in truth, it's the ultimate move of someone who knows their value. When you detach, you stop needing closure from the person who hurt you. You stop waiting for apologies that will never come. You stop dancing around dysfunction just to avoid being seen as the bad guy. You learn that not every battle is worth your sword. Some are traps, dressed up as opportunities to be heard, to be right, to be validated. But here's the hard truth. Most people aren't listening to understand. They're listening to react. They're waiting for a crack in your voice, a break in your resolve, anything to pull you back into the game. And once you're back, they have you. They control the terms. They get to feed off your reaction, your frustration, your need to be seen. That's not power. That's enslavement. So you leave. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You leave the table when respect is no longer being served. You exit the conversation when the outcome has already been decided. You detach not out of pride, but out of protection of your mind, your spirit, your time. There's a calm that comes when you no longer owe anyone an explanation, when you don't feel the need to convince someone of your worth. That calm isn't just peace, it's power, and it terrifies those who depend on your chaos to feel in control. Walking away isn't dramatic, it's surgical, it's clean, it's the cut that heals you, the silence that speaks for you, the move that finally sets you free. People don't fear detachment because it's cold. They fear it because it's honest. Detachment reveals how much of their identity is wrapped up in your response, in your approval, in your attention. That's the part they'll never admit. Because if you stop playing the game, they have to look at who they are without the applause, without the drama, without the control. And for many, that's unbearable. Nietzsche knew this fear well. He called it the terror of facing the abyss, the moment when all the noise falls away and you're left alone with yourself. That's what emotional detachment forces people to do. When you withdraw your energy, your validation, your predictable reactions, you take away their mask. You remove the mirror they were using to define themselves. And what's left? Their raw self, exposed. This is why people panic when you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you stop caring about convincing them. Because deep down, they relied on your need to fix, to justify, to smooth things over. Your detachment threatens their illusion of control, and nothing frightens the ego more than losing its grip. But here's the truth. That fear isn't yours to carry. You're not responsible for someone else's refusal to grow. You are not cruel for stepping back. You are not cold for protecting your peace. The people who guilt you for detaching are often the ones who benefited the most from your lack of boundaries. They're not mourning your absence. They're mourning the loss of their power over you. So expect the backlash, the accusations, the desperate attempts to pull you back into old dynamics. It's all part of the withdrawal, not yours, theirs. Because when you detach, you don't just remove your presence. You remove their ability to define themselves through you. And that is a loss they never prepared to face. There's a kind of silence that makes people uneasy. Not because it's empty, but because it's powerful. When someone who used to argue, explain, or justify themselves suddenly becomes quiet, the shift is seismic. People start to wonder. They question themselves. They try to guess what you're thinking. That is the power of conscious detachment. Nietzsche didn't see detachment as escape. He saw it as the result of deep transformation. The person who detaches is not the one who gave up. It's the one who finally understood the game and walked away from the table. It's not passive. It's not avoidant. It's the highest form of psychological warfare. When you refuse to fight battles that no longer matter to you, the detached person is unsettling because they've stopped playing roles. They're not trying to impress, please, or prove anything. They don't crave validation. They've seen the cost of performing for others, and they've chosen to invest that energy in becoming whole. This kind of presence cannot be faked, and it cannot be ignored. When you walk into a room without needing to dominate it, without speaking first, without making a scene. But people still feel your presence. That's real power. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're not trying to be anything but yourself. And because of that, you're unshakable. The detached mind is focused, sharp. It's not cluttered by emotional noise, not driven by reactivity. It moves with purpose, not impulse. And this unnerves people who are used to manipulating through guilt, confusion, or fear. They realize they can't get in. They can't twist your emotions if you're not offering them up. And that makes you dangerous in all the right ways. But this power doesn't come without cost. To detach is to let go of needing to be liked, to give up the comfort of belonging at any price. It means standing alone sometimes, misunderstood, even resented. But once you've tasted the clarity that detachment brings, you'll never trade it for chaos again. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to over-explain. You simply act from truth, and that truth, when rooted in detachment, speaks louder than anything else. When you finally detach, not just in action, but in essence, something shifts. You become unreachable, not because you've walled yourself off, but because you've stopped letting chaos dictate your path. Nietzsche believed that the highest human is the one who transcends the herd, the reactive instinct, the need to belong. This doesn't mean isolation. It means sovereignty. It means being the author of your own emotional reality. Emotional detachment is the moment you stop seeking revenge, validation, or even understanding. You realize the true strength is not in how loudly you can fight back, but in how little you need to. You become a mystery, not because you're hiding, but because no one can predict you anymore. You don't follow the scripts people try to impose on you. You don't play your part in their drama. You simply remove yourself from the stage. And in doing so, you break the pattern. The energy loop ends with you. There's something terrifying about a person who doesn't react, who doesn't flinch when insulted, doesn't beg when abandoned, doesn't crumble when ignored. That person has nothing left to lose, not because they've given up, but because they've given everything back to themselves. Detachment, in its final form, is liberation. You are no longer managed by guilt, fear, or the constant need to explain yourself. You operate from clarity, not confusion. And here's the truth most aren't ready for. Some people only had power over you because you were emotionally available to them. They could guilt you, bait you, break you, because you let them close enough to do it. But now you see the game. You feel the bait, and you simply do not bite. You nod, you walk away, you let the silence speak. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of becoming who you are. Not a reaction to the world, but a force within it. Unbothered, untouched, unreachable. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You care enough to walk away. You care enough to protect your peace. You care enough to detach, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. That's not weakness. That's the end of manipulation. The end of being owned. That is freedom. That is power. And that is the final form of emotional detachment.